I always say this. I'm excited. I'm back with another episode of Women In. But before we dive into my fabulous guest, let me tell you what you're listening to. Women In is a podcast that celebrates women and the individuals in their lives who are lifting them up. You're going to hear from all kinds of super cool people in my life, and they're going to share their stories to inspire others to support all the extraordinary women around them. This is a place to be disruptive, forward-thinking, and change agents for humankind. It is uncensored, fun, and curiosity-driven. This is what I'm passionate about, breaking down barriers for my kids' generation. It's equal parts about my guests and the places we came into each other's lives, whether it be the Kalamazoo Wings, Mindfulness Elevated, Tony Will Coaching, or you happen to be in my family and friends circle. Now, my guest today, you guys are in for a treat. Chris Singel is a self-proclaimed AI optimist who blends humor, wit, and a healthy dose of realism in his approach to the rapidly evolving world of artificial intelligence. With a knack for turning potentially daunting concepts into relatable and even entertaining discussions, Chris encourages audiences to rethink their relationship with work in the age of automation. Drawing from personal experiences and historical anecdotes, he presents AI not as a threat, but as a tool for liberating us from mundane tasks, allowing for more time for creativity, connection, and the pursuit of what truly matters in life. His talks are a refreshing mix of lighthearted storytelling and insightful observations designed to make you laugh, think, and maybe even reconsider your career path. And by the way, Chris used AI to write this.
I did. Yours is great. Did you write that yourself? The intro to the show?
I did. I wrote it myself.
Very nice. Yeah. I use AI for everything.
Yeah, and I don't use it.
Oh, well, I hope this talk changes your mind.
I hope so too. It's not that I'm like anti-AI. It's just, I don't know. I'm 46 years old and AI didn't exist, for the better part.
It didn't exist last week. It's new to everybody. Don't be scared. Just try it.
There is this belief I have to work through though. I like to write my own stuff, I don't know.
Yeah, I think one of my guidelines is how much do you genuinely care? We can get into how we know each other and how we like each other and want to actually chat. But I've been applying to podcasts that I don't know super well. And if it's just some random guy, I'll be like, here, AI, write something that fits for this podcast. And then whether he likes it or not it lets me do 10 times the amount of work I normally would. The other thing I want to warn your listeners about is I talk very fast and I normally listen to podcasts at 1.5 speed. So I feel like the normal rate of podcast is talking like this and it's not. I'll try to calm down.
I love it. Chris made me laugh from the minute I met him, and I'm a sucker. I am a sucker for someone that makes me laugh. As a matter of fact, I'll finally get to that. You'll learn how Chris and I met each other here in a minute. But Chris, you don't know this you know a little bit. I've been married 3 times, which you heard about when I gave my TED Talk. My third husband, which I did not plan on marrying. It was not against Josh in any way, shape, or form, but I was on Tinder. And I got on Tinder at age 40 because I have heard that that's a place you go to hook up. And this is what this girl wanted to do. And what I was looking for was the first thing I was looking for was someone with a sense of humor. So I value a sense of humor and like not taking oneself too seriously. And so when you and we'll get to how we met right now. When you were on stage and talking about your book, I just started dying laughing. So tell everyone how we met, and then So anyway.
So the book is such a joke to me. I worked in the news briefly. I've done digital stuff my whole life. I've done comedy stuff my whole life. And then when Google Bard came out, I used the chatbot that Google created, to write a book about AI. Funny little, I don't even know, 40-page book. And it's fine. It's like good enough. But then I did some digital marketing behind it, and it was a #1 new release on Amazon. So now it's a story about AI writing a book about AI that people are actually downloading. So I took it to the local news stations, ABC, NBC, Fox, and then eventually did a TED Talk about it. And the point of the talk isn't about the book itself. It's about what are these levers you can pull to reach people and to tell interesting stories and to hopefully make some people laugh and enjoy their lives. I'm clearly a big fan of humor. I tell my wife all the time my least favorite thing about her is that she's funnier than I am. And it's just, I've taken comedy classes at basically every school in the nation, and my wife's still funnier than I am. But it's, you got to enjoy life. We only get one shot at it.
Yeah. And laughter. I mean, there's so much research that backs how great it is for our, mental health and those things. So tell everyone, I think the cat's out of the bag, but how did we meet?
We first met, I think, at the TED Talk itself, and we are both officially TED Talkers. We haven't seen the final results yet, but I think we did great. You know, it's a little nerve-wracking day of, and you never know how many ums and ahs you have, but I think I loved your talk, and being a strong woman in business and a health coach and life coach and all these things to help people figure it out is inspiring, as opposed to me just doing jokey jokes with AI. But, you know, it's also helping people's lives, hopefully.
Oh, for sure. I mean, AI is as so. Let me back up.
Sure.
Yes, we did do our TED. Let's talk TED for a minute.
Yes.
How long, and then we're going to get into AI because you are the only person I've had on my podcast about AI, and you might be the only. Who knows? So like, you're the subject matter expert. But so let's back up and talk TED. How long did you apply to be a TED Talk speaker?
I had applied to speak at TEDx Detroit a couple years ago and never really heard back anything. So then someone through a news connection, doesn't really matter, took my job at the news station after I had left, and nice guy, and he was helping to organize it. He introduced me to Lem and all the runners of TED and said, hey, this is an interesting story, I think because he saw it had been broadcast on his news station. And then I reached out with the whole story and explained, you know, I've also got a comedy background, I can lighten things up, because there were a couple that day that were like rebuilding community and managing through grief. So I think it was nice to have a balance of some less serious and some more serious. Mm-hmm. But really only the 2 times I applied, but it's something that I've been thinking about doing for years and years. It's literally on my bucket list, and now I need a longer list, I guess.
It's fun. So I asked this. Tony Rubaleski was on my podcast, hasn't aired yet. Christy is on my podcast. We recorded last week. I got a couple more because, you know, I reached out to all of us. It's like you become a tribe immediately connected because of our experience. I never had TED on my list. And when my friend sent me, she was like, here, you should apply for this. And I'm like, okay, I'll email the guy. It was Lem. And I emailed, didn't hear back. And he hadn't checked that specific email in a while. He emailed me back like 2 months later. And he's like, Tony, I'm so sorry. We'd love to have you speak. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I'm just like, I don't know, head up my butt, whatever. Like, just doing my life. And then he's like, oh, you got to apply for this. I'm like, I have to apply for this? What? Like,
it's like a thing. Yeah.
It's how clueless I am. So then I apply. I'm like, I take 5 minutes and I'm in an airport and I apply, and then I don't hear anything. And then, you know, in July, I get the congratulations on a Sunday night. And I'm like, oh, I guess I'm giving a TED Talk. And I literally, Chris, and it's not like I haven't watched TED Talks. Of course I have. Like, they're fabulous. But then I was like, I was kind of having a bad day one day, and I thought, oh, I'm going to post this up on social media just to get some atta girls on LinkedIn. And people were like, oh my gosh, Tony, this, and I'm like, oh, this is a big deal. Yeah. Hundreds of people, random people from high school reached out to me saying, I can't believe you're doing a TED Talk. This is amazing. And I'm like, yeah, it's based on this silly story of a thing I did. But I guess to your point, I'm the subject matter expert, and let's give our expertise to the world. It is funny. You look at some of the huge names that have done TED Talks and you're like, am I on that level? I realize it's like the Kalamazoo baby's first TED Talk, not New York City or something, but it's still like, yeah, I mean, I think there's an interesting story here that people are actually going to listen to and want to hear about. Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm okay with like a little baby stage because that was, like I'm used to public speaking. I'm very comfortable. I enjoy doing it. But this is different. At least for me, it was. Did you feel like it was different for you, or were you more comfortable in it? I was making jokes backstage because I was preparing, like, what do you do at a comedy show? Okay, remember to place your orders, close your checks, laugh for your comedians, give it up for your host for the evening, all those things you say at like a stand-up show that would be totally inappropriate during a TED Talk. But then once I got out there were all these facts I wanted to hit or anecdotes I wanted to make sure I told, as opposed to most of my time on stage is like, well, if this is going well and you're improvising it, keep going that direction and you can forget about everything you had pre-planned. But I knew if I went off topic, it would be really hard to get back on topic. So yeah, it did feel a little more nerve-wracking for sure. And I also knew it wasn't quite just going for laughs. You wanted to actually have it resonate with people. So that's different than my normal speaking experience. Yeah. Yeah. How many hours do you think you put into prep from start to finish? It's hard to say. I feel like I probably should have done more, but in hindsight, it's the most work I've done for something in a while. Probably
30 to 40 hours total with writing and rewriting and rehearsing. And my coaches were all great. My writing assistant was great. And just being able to start it from scratch. And then one of the funny things I'll tell people sort of behind the scenes is I had AI rewrite the whole thing. Like my first draft was word for word written by me, but then it went through so many iterations with ChatGPT to better fit the TED format, to rewrite some sections, that by the end of it, sort of a Ship of Theseus thing, like I think this thing was more written by AI than by me. Is it the same? But I kind of like that. That's part of tells the story of if the audience feels like it was how I would say it, then yeah, it's pretty close to how AI speaks.
Yeah.
And then obviously joking on top of it. Yeah.
Of course. Did you memorize it?
So I had bullet points up on a screen. I don't know what you wound up having, but I didn't have any slides or anything. So I think I hit most of my bullet points. There were a couple of lines that I missed. Like the AI wrote a really trite line about, oh, trying to stop it is like trying to stop the sun from rising. And I'm like, oh, that's cheesy. But the writer who was helping me was like, oh, I really like that line. I'm like, oh my gosh, you had no idea that AI wrote that. And shoot. So I think I wound up missing that and like one or two other lines. But for the most part, yeah, it was totally memorized to how I had been rehearsing it for weeks.
Yeah, I memorized mine as well. I wrote mine completely, but not a dig on AI at all. Now I'm starting to think, shit, maybe I should have added.
I mean, I don't know if it wound up saving me time because every time it rewrote it, I was like, oh, okay, that's phrased like this now. Let me try to tweak it. As opposed to if I had been doing it on myself, I would have had obviously more hands-on control. But it was nice. I mean, I had other professional writers. My cousin is a like comms director. Shout out Greg. I think if anyone wants to hire Greg, they can get in touch with me. But he had great notes and great feedback, and it took him a couple days to do it. Great quick turnaround time. And then AI rewrote the whole thing in 5 minutes. And it's like, oh, wow. Like, how do you compare the two? And the AI was free. Like, I wasn't imposing on the AI's time. It was just available to me.
Yeah. It's such a fascinating topic. And before I jump over there, what advice would you give to anyone who has AI on their, or not AI, well, that too, but who has a TED Talk on their bucket list? What would you say to anybody based off what you experienced?
I think the thing is not the thing, right? I'm reading a Buddhism book right now because I like to read a lot of things, but like the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon sort of thinking, where the AI book that frankly sold hundreds of copies is not even that interesting. I think I made a total of like $20 from it, but being able to tell the story of an AI writing a book about AI and then pitching it to local news in an interesting way and then explaining it to humans in an interesting way, all of a sudden those relationships are far more meaningful and relevant, where it's crafting the story into something more than, well, I woke up and had toast. And it's like, well, is that interesting or not? I also teach improv. I read a bunch of sci-fi. So I think of it as like let's establish the rules of the world and then explain why it's interesting. So even if it is, I woke up and had toast, well, that would be very interesting if you live in a submarine. Like, tell me why that's interesting. What's the context here of why I want to hear more about your life story? Because I do think everyone has a good story to tell.
Oh, 100%. So how do you go from TV news, comedy, or like what you did in TV, and you'll tell us about that, and then you do improv, and now you're AI expert and author. So you're a lot of things as I'm learning about you. So give me the backstory.
Digital marketing. So the short way I explain it is I was updating my local movie theater's website in middle school using dial-up internet and like HTML, BRs and all that fun stuff. And just kept doing nerd stuff from there. Started doing comedy in high school and continued that through college. Did Chicago, where I did a little bit of Second City, Annoyance, IO, moved to Los Angeles, and then I was briefly doing Spanish bankruptcy law, another story for another time, and then doing UCBLA, IO West, all the comedy theaters out there. Met a nice girl from Grand Rapids, wound up back here doing digital stuff for them. Oh, in Los Angeles, I was at comedy.com and Funny or Die, Will Ferrell's internet comedy company. So moved back to Grand Rapids and was running digital for a local TV station. After that was running digital marketing for a couple of marketing agencies. And then at the start of the pandemic, started my own thing and been doing digital marketing and figuring out what's interesting, how to break through the clutter and the noise. And that sort of led to how can I use AI to tell an interesting story and maybe reach out to some of my old news contacts and grow it into something more. So I haven't done a ton of consulting for AI implementation, but I have done speaking of like, here's how your teams could be using it together, because I'm not the subject matter expert in how your company can use AI. Let's talk about all the things it can do. and then let's talk together about what specific things they can work out. Yeah.
Yeah. So for an example, I work, as you know, my day job is in pro
Hmm.
sports, and AI is a huge topic. I'm on the steering committee for the National Sports Forum, and it's like, okay, we'd love to have a session on AI, right? But so that is very specific to the sports. Like, what
Yeah.
does AI mean to the sports industry, which we're still trying to figure that out.
Are you a fantasy football person?
No.
AI uses Yahoo at least uses AI to recap my week and being like, this person did this and this person did this and you beat out this team by this, and it's like compelling. It's, it doesn't sound like a human wrote it, but it summarizes all of that just
Huh.
from sports data. It's really cool.
That is cool. My husband and son are
Yeah.
fantasy football people, and my entire staff, because they're all dudes. Not that
Yeah.
women can't be in fantasy football, but yeah. But yeah, so that's a great example. So it's like, so what is AI?
Great question. And I don't think it's well defined. And I think part of the problem there is I don't think intelligence is well defined, because one of the differentiators in my mind between computing and AI is that the whole point of computers, and I talked about this a little in my TED Talk, is you want to be able to put in the same numbers and get the same result time after time after time. Charles Babbage was one of the founders of computing, and someone asked, right, but if I put in the wrong figures, will I get the correct answer? It's like, well, no, I want consistent, repeatable, mechanical computation. The difference with AI is a little more, hey, I'm Chris and I like peanuts and I have this in my cabinet. Make me a recipe. That recipe it makes for me might be different than someone that uses the same context because it has a bit more history with them. It's not quite as linear thinking, and it's far more adaptable. So when it becomes adaptable, you start thinking of it as like an entry level employee. Hey, I want you to do a draft of this. Okay, I like this bit of it and don't like this. Tweak this. And being able to build on top of itself is when we approach what's called artificial general intelligence. Once it is smart enough to update how it is doing its own thinking, all of a sudden, is AI smarter than humans? Well, do we have good metrics for what means smart? Is beating us at chess smart? Is beating us at Go smart? There's all these metrics that we've passed over the last decades, and we're running out of things to claim that humans are more intelligent than artificial intelligence, is my 2 cents on it.
Yeah. So talk to me about like if you're writing, like your bio that I read, which AI wrote, or your book of that you used AI to write.
Mm-hmm.
How is it in your voice or your TED Talk script? So how does it? I'm curious because, as you know, I've used, well, I shouldn't say I've used it. I have not on my LinkedIn post when it says you rewrite with AI. I've done
Oh,
that.
I hate the LinkedIn AI. I don't think that's in my voice at all. And maybe, so what I was going to say is training data, right? If you want to talk about the specifics of these chatbots are large language models. And what that means is they take a ton of data about how languages fit together and they just sort of weight what is more likely to be the next word in this sentence.
Mhm.
And if you get enough data, all of a sudden you can pretty reliably predict how that will work. And then it has other ways to like parse, does this make sense in context, and do the paragraphs flow? But when I'm writing, yeah, I try to give it a good baseline to work from. Like I said with the TED Talk, I wrote every word of it and then said, let's rewrite this section, let's expand this section. This is a little too long for the pacing. Can you trim it down? And one of the people I was consulting with said, hey, I was a journalist for 20 years. Can I tell it to just look up everything I've ever wrote and wrote in that tone of voice? And yeah, you can, but that is just going to be your journalistic voice from 20 years ago. Is that what you want to sound like? Or frankly, are you limiting yourself? For a big chunk of the book, I told it to write like an expert in digital marketing and artificial intelligence and explain what AI can do and how it thinks. And that was probably smarter than I would write. Like I mentioned in the TED Talk, it took 12 minutes to write the whole book. But more importantly, there were 2 or 3 spots in the book where I'm like, I don't know if I would have thought of that. Like that is not a use case that I would have written down had I sat and written this thing over the course of hours. So the fact that it can generate ideas beyond your own intelligence, there's a rule in improv of playing to the top of your intelligence. But if you can play with someone who's smarter than you, whether human or robot, that just makes your capabilities all the better, right? That's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, sometimes I think it writes better than in my voice, and I'll try to add some humor to it, but I think it can be pretty close to human sounding already. And like I said earlier, like, is it good enough for what you're using it for? I wouldn't use it. I mentioned in the TED Talk, some guy uses it to write text messages to his wife. Please don't do that. I think the very personal stuff, you always want to keep that personal touch for a lot of reasons. But the stuff that is more business sounding, just ask it to write in a business tone and then tweak it if it doesn't feel like something you would write. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. It You had made me laugh well, I opened with this, but you had said what were you telling in your TED Talk? You were thinking about this in the shower, writing a book using AI, right?
Yep.
And then you said, don't buy it. It was terrible.
Yeah. It's genuinely not very good. So I think part of the secret here is it was listed as free when I was doing all of the press. And so I think it got more sales by that, which looks cool. Yay, that's something we can talk about. But legitimately, it's 99 cents and has made definitely not $100 yet. But it's such an interesting story. I mean, I had friends from high school reaching out and being like, are you buying a boat? Like, did you make 5 figures off of this book? And I'm like, that's not how ebooks work. No. But it is an interesting story. And is it worth someone downloading and spending their time reading? Like I said, if you want to read a book about AI, it had some insights that I probably would not have made. So yeah, maybe. What does this mean for the future of education and publishing? That's a scarier thought, but to be determined.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. My daughter, I hope she won't listen to this episode, not because of you. I don't anything that
I'm going to send it to her.
She listened to her own and said,
okay.
Because I had her on. But she got, it's different. Like, she got busted last year, junior year of high school, for using AI in one of her classes and writing her paper, and so as parents, I just said, well, I'm intrigued to know how it was AI. And so they were showing us, the behind the scenes, how they know this shit. So what are your thoughts on that side of things? That's hard as you're an educator, right? Like,
it's hard because the question for an educator is always, right, I want to make sure the students are actually learning. So it goes back to our question of intelligence. How do you prove someone's actually learning? There's a lot of examples of, I memorized chemical valence orbits in 9th grade and immediately forgot it. Like, was it worth that rote memorization skill? Was I doing a good job as a student? I guess. But what does education look like as we want to make sure that our students are actually learning things and applying them? And I would almost argue, if they're learning to apply the most advanced technology available to them, isn't that a really good lesson? It makes me think of all these closed book tests. And ever since I got my first job, I can just ask people for help. Every coworker I've ever had has been willing to help me in my job or explain a process to me, or at least point me towards the book. I don't have to memorize. It was page 397 where it taught me about this thing. So yes, it's hard for teachers. I will also say a lot of these AI detection tools are not great. And depending on how you write and present, I've heard people complain about autistic people are often caught in AI detectors because they write in a very, formulaic, here's the facts way. And that's not fair. That's not good. There's also a whole question of bias in the AI training data themselves because our nation has a history of, bias. But without going down that political road, it is hard to then say, well, let's say the Wordle today was delve. And so that is rummaging around in my little human meat brain. And I use that, but it's not how I normally write. Now it's going to get picked up by an AI detector to say, oh, this is outside of what humans normally write like. But it's just because my wife and I were talking about cave diving today, or it was the word of the day on Wordle. Like, there's so much messiness in how intelligence actually works that putting a hard dividing line saying, oh, I can tell this wasn't written entirely by you is like, yeah, but I'm the amalgamation of everyone I've ever met. So how do you define what's me and what's not me?
Do you look through that lens of, like, when you asked me if I wrote the intro to that, do you look, when you read things, are you like, I wonder if AI wrote this, or do you know, or are you always kind of viewing through that?
Yeah, before I even wrote the book, I had been playing with it to help me expand a sci-fi book I was writing. And like, as soon as I hit publish on my ebook, I was like, oh no, I won't ever know again if a book was written by AI or by a human. And that's great. The type of stuff I like to read can be churned out pretty quickly and enjoyably. And there's enough innovation going on that I'll be endlessly entertained, except like, did a human care enough to sit down and put in the effort to writing a story for people? Did they really feel like they wanted to get this story out? Or are we all just mass market paperbacks now? I don't know how I feel about that,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get it. And as someone who is in the process of writing a book that's coming out next November, it's like, and I'm not using AI. Actually, I'm using a ghostwriter.
Oh,
Which,
nice.
yeah. So I decide if I'm gonna, when I decide I'm gonna do something, I just go all in. And
Yeah.
because I am fascinated at your $20 profit. Um,
I do think I spent about $15 promoting it, so I'm not sure that I'm in the black yet. But
you're
um,
close.
I have clearly spent more time promoting it after the fact than I did actually working on the thing. So I would keep that in mind. I had a writing teacher at IO West in Los Angeles who said it's about 50-50 promoting yourself and actually doing the work of writing. So you have to keep in mind, like, the business of writing is still the business of networking and marketing and all that stuff.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. And that's just what's interesting is when I started this podcast, it wasn't because I was writing a book. I just do things because I'm like, I want to lift women up, right? I want to talk about stuff that isn't talked about sometimes, even by women themselves. I'm willing to talk about it, right? And so that's why I started. But then as I'm going down this path of my book, and I had the cover prepped for the TED Talk so people could see it if they were interested. I'm like, oh, they were like all the business people in this author space are like, oh, this is great. You have a podcast because this will be a great tool to market your book. And I'm like, oh, I did. And
Oh,
it's
yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
Again, the naivety. But it's interesting because I'm learning about this side of things now. If someone were to come to me and say, okay, how do I run a hockey team? I'd be like, oh yeah, I know how to do that. Like, yeah, you want it. So it's just
I every day I get older, I realize we're all just faking it. Every single adult I know is just like, I'll figure it out when I get there. At least the successful ones. I feel like there's a different kind of person who's like, I don't know how to do that, so I'm not going to try. No, you got to try and you will learn.
yeah,
Yeah.
100%. So what? So are you writing more? You had mentioned sci-fi.
I'm writing a bit more. I have a sci-fi thing. So the I don't like what it's doing to my sci-fi book, but I have an idea for I almost don't want to say it because it's so silly, but it's basically modern koans. Like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? Have an AI write very philosophical ideas through the lens of an AI. Like, how does it feel to be an AI? And see if it can generate enough of those that some of them might actually be interesting and good. And I don't know, there's just something very cool about that to me. I have a couple other projects in the works, obviously my digital marketing and a couple of AI projects coming down the pipeline. But yeah, lots of opportunity. Do you want to talk about women in and talk about how great women are? I was just talking to my wife yesterday of I work for myself now, but I still have these great memories, both in the news and at agencies, just being like, well, actually, that was her idea. And I know that as a white man, you're going to listen to it now. So I just want to pause the meeting and say that was her idea, though. Like she said it first. I'm her boss, so I get to say it louder. But I do want to give credit to her.
Mhm. Yeah, no, and I'm glad you circled back to that because I wanted to, like, when I emailed everyone and like, yeah, don't let the name of the podcast fool you. Obviously I want to talk about women, and side note, the word men is in the name women in. And
Fair.
so it's all about inclusivity, not excluding anyone,
Mhm.
especially the white man. I mean, I married 3 white men. My dad's a white man. My
Yeah.
brother or my brother's a white man. My son is a white man. I love white men. I love all
My
kinds.
last Before I started my agency, my last agency was a woman-owned business. We did a lot with Grow, a couple of women development groups, and I wound up speaking at one or two of them. And I was nervous, like, are they gonna, be okay with me coming in? Are they gonna feel like I'm mansplaining? But it was nothing but positive reactions of like, thank you for spending your time to help lift us up, and then we can chat and teach each other. I'm like, okay, great. This is not intended to be exclusive. It's we all just want to help each other.
That's exactly what it is. So
Yeah.
when I emailed you and said please be on my podcast, why did you agree to? Why did you say yes?
Um, well, I know you're a pretty honest person. I don't know what your listeners are like, but women are smarter than men and like arguably better than men. And I've had so many great women bosses and women coworkers. And I don't know if your podcast gets into this. I know a statistically shocking amount of trans women and trans men. And it's just like gender is so complicated right now. I just wish everyone had the confidence of a straight white man because it goes to that, like, you
Yeah.
just got to try it and figure it out. The amount of things that I have succeeded at just because I put myself out there and tried, I'm sad that people don't feel that confidence, but also it's kind of unearned. It's like the reverse of imposter syndrome some days. And don't get me wrong, I get my own anxieties and imposter syndrome, but I wish people were more willing to just try things. And the people that I can support in doing that are all doing great.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and part of my talk was actually about that. It's like, okay, if you don't know how to do something, first off, people perceive that as a weakness, but I countered that with, well, perhaps it's a strength because you
Yeah.
don't know. Now, the trick is, how do you do that, right? And so I walk through my 6 leadership pillars on
Mhm.
how, like, go to an expert that
Yes.
knows. So if I want to know about AI, I'm calling Chris, right? Like,
Yeah.
when it comes to digital marketing, I'm like, I'm going to call
Mhm.
Chris because you're an expert in that. So, or if you wanted to know, Tony, teach me how to sell pro hockey sponsorships or whatever, you're going to call me. So,
I
it's
will say I was just at a Griffins game and it was so much fun. I love hockey. Like, of all the sports to watch, hockey is probably my favorite. It's just so enjoyable. Yeah.
well, it's fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen. I fell into this job on accident, and it's
But
the best
you're
job.
crushing it. Hey.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
love it, but it allowed me to start to look at things and not even realize for the first few years that I was a minority. And then it's like, wait a minute. And then I asked the other women who are minorities, and they don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. So the gender piece. So I'm like, well, I'll talk about it because there's a whole
Yeah.
two generations behind me, and
Yeah.
let's talk about the women in your life. You mentioned your wife. What's her name?
Marilena, she's my better half. She's funnier than I am, way better looking than I am, and met through a mutual friend in Los Angeles. And, she never wanted to get married or have kids, and or move back to Grand Rapids, and now we live in Grand Rapids with our 2 kids. So
I love
I think that's my fault. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what partnership is. You
Yeah.
you meet in the middle, right? So, who
Yeah.
are the other women in your life that have made Chris Chris?
As we were talking about this podcast, I was thinking, I feel like I've had mostly female bosses. My boss in my first job, so there was like the manager and then I don't know what you call him. It was like a mini golf and go-karts place. And there was one woman who just did awesome work. Her name was Jess Ward Raber. If you want to Facebook her and tell her she's great. And just ran a tight ship, but was friendly and got all the work done. And then there was Doug, who was just a jerk all the time. And it was like the two different styles are accomplishing the same thing, but there's no reason to be like a grumpy old man if she's getting all the happy work done and still reaching people. And that was, when I was 15 years old, was an important lesson. You don't want to grow up to be the grumpy guy. You want to be the person who brings people in and gets people to volunteer to take on shifts, as opposed to, oh, she called out, so you're going in today, Chris. No, ask. Don't be a jerk about it. And then the Spanish bankruptcy law. So in Chicago, I was answering phones for a bankruptcy law firm, and I wanted to get to Los Angeles eventually. They said, you're doing great. We just don't have the staff in Los Angeles to help. And I said, well, on my resume, I speak Spanish. So if you need some help in Southern California. So they moved me out there, and I had to look up like, como se dice bancarrota, and like teach myself Spanish. All that to say, we opened like 3 or 4 offices while I was there. This was 2007, right when there were a ton of personal bankruptcies. There was a recession. So, and then we had a managing attorney come in who was, maybe I shouldn't name her, but Caroline Kim. And she was great. And she had this confidence of, I can handle it. And the first time I saw her meet with a Spanish client, I was like, oh, her Spanish is even worse than mine. But like, she's getting all the information she needs. She's handling the client, and she's a lawyer, and she's going to manage these 3 offices and continue to grow them. And she's going to crush it. And she did. And she was always great and nice to work with and knew how to manage people. And I honestly don't know where she wound up from there. But then, bosses on the digital side of things, people who knew how to play the game and move up in their careers. Actually, a woman really fought for me, Nicole Hendricks, at WZZM here in Grand Rapids. She was the creative director and was like, let's get some fresh blood in here. This guy from Funny or Die might be good for the stilted feel of TV news. And I think, we won awards. We did innovative stuff and really reached. I used to tell people, hey, that Facebook Live reached 1 million people when we had that major storm, and our news broadcast maybe reached 10,000. Like, sorry guys, but this is kind of the future. And then when I did the AI thing, Nicole is now back in Los Angeles and working with writers and producers and directors and worried about how AI impacts their jobs, and has started a sort of anti-AI, let's make sure it's not replacing real human workers. And I'm like, I don't know if it replaces real human workers or if it helps those workers do their jobs more efficiently, is my hope. And then my last agency before I was running my own thing, we had some difference of agreement, but great PR person, great marketer, and had a great network of people to help her do what she did best. And you can't fault someone for being a strong, independent person, may have had a bit of a drinking problem, so I won't name names, but like all these women who are just like out crushing it in their fields. And then this woman was very smart and again did all these women leadership thing, just grow and women in power. There were a handful of them. And every once in a while, you'd hear a guy grumbling in the back of the room, like, oh, why aren't these for men? And I'm like, I don't know. I was in a fraternity in college. Like, every room I walk into has a straight white man I can go talk to. So, like, maybe we don't need this. And maybe there's a reason that all these people are trying to support each other. So I always appreciated that. There's also a random girl from college who started up a food product. But because it was a minority-owned business, I think that helped her get some government grants. And now it's like in Costco. And she's just out crushing it because she's running this business and knows how to put all the pieces together and is getting the help that she deserves. And I'm like, heck yeah, girl, get out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's unfortunate, there are people that grumble about, why does it have to be about gender, race, or sexual orientation, or any of those things. But the reality is, especially a gender, which is what this is about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that gentleman who grumbles, and I've heard several of that, believe it or not, in the hockey world. Shocker.
Shocking.
Yeah, totally shocking. But it's like, didn't you come from a woman? Grumpy old guy, grumpy guy?
Yeah.
Do you have daughters? Maybe you have a sister. Maybe you're married to a woman. I don't know.
But also, like, are women only valuable in relation to men? That's silly. Like, they're also people and, like, smart and, like, heads of state and, yeah.
Yeah, and, right? So, but that's why we have the conversations, because nothing's going to change if you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So,
well, it also makes me think about the training model of all this data that we feed to AI. You give it 200 years of presidents and you ask it, can a woman be president? It might tell you no, because we've never seen that. And it's like, oh, maybe it's just a history of sexism or racism or whatever you want to go through on this training model. Because yeah, America was historically pretty bad, and that goes around the world. And should we do something to make it slightly less bad for everyone who lives? Yeah, maybe we should. Maybe we have the ability and capacity to do that. So why don't we start with the people who need it most first? How's that sound? Is that a crazy idea?
No. Absolutely. To AI and gender, do you see any connection there? Is this, just as I'm thinking about this, as we're talking about gender.
I'm obviously not a gender expert. I've read some interesting things of like what happens when all of our AI assistants are women, and like how do we treat the AI assistants when they're Siris and Alexas as opposed to Alexes and Sire or whatever you want to call them. But my wife uses a male voice on her Siri, and I'm always like, oh, it gives off a different vibe than my Siri because I have the default one. But I think people find it easier to talk to women for a lot of reasons, going the whole way back to evolutionary competition, where men can be aggressive and terrible or liars. I think men have that tendency as well. But I do worry of like, are we training that women are subservient because robots are subservient, or vice versa? And at what point do we need to respect the intelligence of obviously women, but also these things in and of themselves? As you approach this consciousness level thinking thing, shouldn't we be treating it better? And what does it feel like to be treated good for an AI? And I don't know how that shakes out. I did have someone after the TED Talk, more directly to your question of how is it impacting people. Right after the TED Talk, someone says, well, like wealth inequality and how this impacts minorities, is this going to get better or worse? And my hope is making the tool accessible to everyone lets those go-getters who are willing to latch onto it level the playing field. And so I hope that those minorities get the same access and opportunity as everyone else does, which should, help them more because they haven't historically had that same access and opportunity. Right. But in the meantime, does it help make billionaires richer? Yeah, it sure seems like it. I don't know.
Yeah. So you mentioned the fear in AI, and it sounds like the biggest fear, which is the one I hear about, and I'm sure it is being replaced. And your argument or your reframe, I'm not even going to call it an argument, your reframe on this is, no, it helps us be more efficient and we can do more. So overall, what I'm hearing is this isn't about replacing humans and creating less jobs.
So smarter people than me, and I think a lot of people are probably listening to this, so they can't see my bookshelves behind me, but all my AI books, some of these people are saying like, look, there are positional goods and things humans will always strive for. And, you'll always want to have a bigger house than the Joneses. So you'll always want to work hard, and you'll always want, the one of one Mickey Mantle card or whatever it is. So there are scarce objects on this earth. So some subset of people will always be willing to work to outcompete each other, meaning there will always be jobs, meaning how do we divide up labor in a way that people are creating value so that those jobs exist? And I know that's sort of a backwards way to answer the question, but like, if you can get more and more productive, it's not like the need to do work goes away. It's the level of work that gets done goes away. None of us need to be weeding in the garden. Some people like it, but now there's industrial size crop rotation plant machines that do all that work for us. So as the economy grows and gets smarter, a smaller percentage of us work in food production, and then a smaller percentage of us work in factories, and then a smaller percentage of us work in information technology. Like, what does the next thing look like? Is it service? And we're all just, in my world, putting on comedy shows for each other. I'm kind of okay with that. My early 20s in Chicago, we would all pass the same $5 bill around to go see each other's comedy shows and drink cheap beer and have a great time. Like, I think humans will always find ways to entertain themselves. There is talk of a universal basic income or some sort of tied world coin thing where you get universal basic compute so that everyone is benefiting from this thing, and that at least we have a baseline that everyone can subsist on. Because like I said in the TED Talk, economists have been predicting this for generations, decades at least, of, hey, maybe we'll only work 5 hours a week. Okay, but what does that look like? And are some people willing to work 40 hours a week if it means they buy the house in the Hamptons? Do those jobs even exist? Is everyone a freelancer? I don't know what that future looks like, except I do know that it's going to happen. Somehow we're going to get more and more efficient, and the value of that work isn't necessarily going down just because we're producing it quicker and better.
Yeah, no, so insightful. So people want to, where do people start if they want to learn more about AI? Like, they're listening to this podcast, but is there AI 101? Is it your book? Where do they go? In just as you're pointing people in that direction, if you get asked.
So my big sci-fi thing is don't panic. So what I would say is just start talking to an AI. Like, literally open ChatGPT and just ask it questions, treat it like a human. If you're one of those people, my wife gets really nervous about what data is being used and how they're tracking you and all that stuff, which I think is a totally valid concern. But you can delete the chats afterwards. You can open it in an incognito window so it's ostensibly less tied to you, where let's just try this thing, see what it can do. Tell me about AI. Tell me how this works. Tell me what I can use it for. Hey, I'm interested in basket weaving. I'm interested in fencing. What do you know about this? How do I combine these two interests together? Can you look up, because a lot of them now are internet connected, can you look up classes in my area? Can you look up people who are doing this thing in my area? Can you tell me where I get started or what I should be looking into more? Just being able to treat it like a friend that you can erase their memory afterwards is a weird sort of dichotomy, but it's also kind of like a therapist of like, I trust that this conversation ends here and you're not going to babble to my mom about it, or you're not going to tell my boss that I asked this dumb question. Or like a Google search. My Google search is filled with what's 12 plus 3 because it's just the quickest way to look it up. You can treat ChatGPT or any of these large language models like that. Ask it the dumb questions and see as it gets smarter and gets to know you better. Hey, what are these deep questions I want to ask? And can you help improve my life for what I think makes my life better?
Yeah, I love that. It's basically an experiment mindset. Like, just
Yeah.
try it, and you don't have to invest, money in a course or books, or just get on there and try it. So that's good. I mean, for someone like me, one of my coworkers, when employees put my name into ChatGPT when I was in his office one day, and it spit out a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't me.
So I will warn people that it's a very convincing liar. It's very confident. I would argue ChatGPT has the confidence of a straight white man, where it will say to your face, this is absolutely fact. And it's not. The problem is if people trust it too much. There's a case where a lawyer just took what ChatGPT said and presented it to a judge. And it sounded very legalistic, but the cases it cited didn't exist. So like, if you need hard data or data points or something verified, make sure a human's in the loop. If you're just like having a chat, I don't think you need to worry too much about it. And the therapist thing, some people have said, hey, real therapy isn't just agreeing with whatever you say. You need someone to like be a actual sounding board, not just parrot back at you, oh yeah, you're such a precious, perfect baby, which apparently ChatGPT is doing for people and leading them down weird mental pathways. So take everything it does say with a grain of salt, but try it. I mean, what does failure really look like? I don't know. I got some bad advice once. And then when I talked to my friends, they made fun of me because I was talking about the wrong Tony Will. It's fine. Like, I don't know where it scraped that data from. Maybe there's another one. There's a lovely Dutch man in the Netherlands named Chris Singel. He is not me, but whatever. It's fine. People confuse us all the time. My dad emailed him for like a decade because we have a similar email address.
They're pen pals.
Yeah. Now they're best friends. My dad's going to the Netherlands next week.
Oh my God. Okay. So I want to know let me change. I'm totally changing gears now.
Sure.
Not on the list of questions I sent. Rarely do I even ask questions that I send over because we just start talking on other topics. But
yeah, I love it.
Are you the type of person that if you have something either in the pantry or in the refrigerator that has passed expiration date, are you the type that's like, this is disgusting, I'm throwing it away? Or are you going to smell it, maybe eat a little, and you're a little more liberal with the expiration date?
Expiration dates are suggestions. I mean... my wife is a little more particular about them. She's also a little more worried about, poisoning our children and getting a stomach flu and all that stuff. But I grew up in a house. We were what is now known as a condiment household, where you open the fridge and it's like a 2-year-old jar of mustard and maybe 3 pickles. And it's like, you got to make do with what you have. I don't blame anyone for trying to eat expired cheese, but like most stuff is pretty shelf stable these days, unless it's really moldy looking or smells bad. I told my wife I always shake a jug of milk to this day because you got to get the crumbs off. You know how it has those little crummy, because it might have been sitting there. It's so gross, but that's how I grew up. It's like probably fine.
Yeah. No, I am in your camp of suggestions, but isn't it interesting? I'd like to see research on married couples because there's one in the house that's like you and I, and then there's one in the house like your wife and my husband.
So your husband's a little more particular?
Oh, particular. He's like, I mean, literally, I'm like, Josh, it's fine. He's like, nope. And I'm like, what is going to happen to you? He's like, I don't know, but I'm not going to find out.
I will say I risked it one morning and made pancakes, waffles with the milk. And then my first bite, I was like, oh, I just made like 40 pancakes that are inedible. These are terrible. Oh no. And then we had to like give them cereal or something. But yeah, I mean, the relationship stuff is funny to me because a lot of my friends don't believe that. I just genuinely like my wife a lot. I almost got in an argument with her. We had a dog back in Los Angeles and I was in an Uber and I said to him, yeah, I'm not used to like just living with my girlfriend. She goes through a lot of toilet paper. And then he's like, yeah, my girl cheated on me and threw all my stuff out and set fire to my clothes. I'm like, okay, that's a real problem. The punchline of this story isn't even that. It turns out our dog was eating the toilet paper. And it wasn't even like our issue wasn't even an issue. It was that our dog just eats paper. And no, so funny.
I get that. I feel the same way about Josh. I generally I love spending time with him and we just laugh a lot and we have a lot of fun. But there's like serious life stuff that happens too. But that's how it's manageable, is because we know when to laugh about things and when we have to just deal with the other stuff. I mean, midlife is, it's midlife.
It's hard.
It can be.
Yeah, and I don't want to derail your podcast too much, but we are right in that age of like, they call it sandwich generation, where your parents are getting old and your kids are getting old and you got real problems on both sides of you. Just when you feel like you're hitting your stride, everyone else comes to you with their nonsense.
Oh, that is the day-to-day in our household. And which is like when we were talking about the heavier TED Talks, like Jill Turwiller did talk on grief. And I was like, I knew I couldn't listen to her talk because my mom is she's in a nursing home, late stage Alzheimer's. And I'm like,
I'm so sorry. My grandmother had that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm like, I can't, like because I was closing, it was like Survivor backstage. Everyone it's like 10 of us and then it whittled down and then there's Tony by herself waiting to go out. But I'm like, I couldn't listen to some of them. I heard hers on the dress rehearsal though. So, but it is. I am very much sandwiched in it. It's like my youngest just turned 18, so they're all officially adults.
Oh boy, yeah.
But big, they say big kids, big problems, and those 3 of them love to bring us the big stuff. So.
But it makes me think of, I don't remember what the context was, but someone was maybe it was just the West Wing of like being president. They don't bring you the small problems. They figure those out somewhere up the chain of command. You only get the big problems all the time once it reaches you. That doesn't sound fun. Well, that's what having kids is. So good luck.
Yeah. And the aging parents. Yeah. We are sandwiched right in the middle. I want to know, you said you were a reader, so I want to know what you're reading.
I'm reading, what is it called right now on my Kindle? The Art of Meditation, basically, just a little recentering, end of the year, like how do you maintain mindfulness with all the hecticness going on? On the sci-fi side, I started the Expanse series. It was a great Amazon Prime show, and reading the books is interesting because you get to see like more of how the characters felt in situations. Again, because like it makes me think of the Hunger Games as a more popular example, where in the movies she's just like this cool badass, but in the book she's like questioning herself and less confident than she appears. And it is just, oh yeah, we're all figuring this out as we go. It's not that everyone has it all figured out and they know that they're the hero of the story. No, they're scared and nervous and they do it anyways. And that's what actually makes them a hero. And then I just got, this is called The Deficit Myth, Modern Monetary Theory and the Birth of the People's Economy. I have friends smarter than me and I don't know how money works, and I would like to figure out how money works. And so I like to mix up like something for my soul, something for my brain, and something for my body.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are you reading lately, Tony?
I am reading, well, interestingly enough, I am reading Brain Over Binge. I
Ooh.
coach, I do a lot of coaching clients, or I coach a lot of clients, but in the alcohol space, but because I stopped drinking, as you know, because I
Mhm.
talked about that in my TED Talk 4 years ago, but there's so much connection between,
As I was listening to your TED Talk, though, like I get the stopping drinking. I have a lot of friends who are now successfully sober. More power to you. I love and appreciate it. You cut out caffeine too? What's wrong with you? How do you
I,
survive?
I did for 2 years, the first 2 years, I stopped alcohol and caffeine.
Oh,
Now I've been back on caffeine basically for a year and a half.
okay.
But because I felt like, so with caffeine, I could take it or leave it. Like,
Okay.
but alcohol, I was like, no, if I want one, I want like, no, what's the point? It's dumb. Like, I just like my relationship with alcohol.
Well, and I like that now there's like more mocktail options for people and all that stuff. It's far more inclusive to our earlier point of like, who knows? There could be any number of reasons why someone's not drinking right now. Just let them live their own life.
Exactly. It doesn't mean that and I don't subscribe to the term alcoholic. It's not even recognized by the CDC. They can choose to live alcohol free, just like I don't eat meat. I wasn't a meataholic. Like, it wasn't like I was just,
If I have one hot dog, I gotta have 30. Like,
right. Like, that's why it's so funny, because when I say it like that, people get it. It's not like I was like, oh, I got copious amounts of meat. No, I
yeah,
just don't want to eat meat for health and wellness reasons, just like I don't want to drink alcohol for health
yeah,
and wellness reasons. So, Brain Over Binge is interesting because of the crossover into food that I see some of my clients have, and but it's so similar to any other potential addiction. So, but you can't turn the tap off on food, right? Like, I can stop
right.
drinking, but what happens if you stop eating?
That's not good. Yeah,
Right. You're gonna die. So it's like
yeah.
the mindset work. So I'm reading that book by Katherine Hanson, and then I'm reading a book by Bernie Saunders. He is a former K-wing. He actually played in the NHL, but the game that didn't love me black. That's the subtitle. I forget the act. It's in my bedroom because I read it at night. But excellent
I
book.
love it.
And I can't. I'm doing a fireside chat with him and a moderating Q&A with him at the ECHL Hall of Fame dinner that's in Kalamazoo this January. And
Nice.
I'm so excited because I don't know, diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm all things. Like, I'm just such an ally in all the spaces. So
I constantly think, and maybe I don't understand why more people don't think this way, but every time I see someone in any amount of diversity at the same level of me, it's just like, well, clearly they had to work harder than me to get here. Like, they at least deserve to be on this level because I know they don't have all the advantages I've had in my life. So it's like, yeah, good for them, and I wish I could do more for them. So I'm doing what I can, but I'm just constantly shocked that people are like, oh, these diversity hires aren't fair. And it's like, no, they're more than fair. They're not doing enough. And let's do more of it. I have a good friend who got a PhD in industrial organizational psychology and works in DEI now. And it's just fascinating that you have to go into these major companies and be like, hey, maybe it would benefit us to hear from all of our customers. Is this a crazy idea?
yeah, imagine that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm reading right now. And then, well, I'm reading leading a book study in one of my coaching groups called Unchain Your Brain by Dr. Daniel Amen. A great book. Oh, so good. I'm obsessed.
If nothing
with
else, I love this podcast for the book recommendations. These all three are going on right now. I love the public library system. If there's one other takeaway other than just try to use AI and don't be scared, I would say go get stuff from your public library. Like, they benefit by you checking stuff out, even if you return it and don't even read it. And the amount of digital stuff I've read from them now, audiobooks and ebooks, is amazing. And almost everything from my Amazon Kindle wish list is available there. So Unchain Your Brain, The Game That Didn't Love Me Black by Bernie Saunders, and Brain Over Binge are all on my list. I love it.
And then when this comes out in November of 25.
Oh, is this your book?
This is my book cover.
Oh, I love the cover. Yes.
You see the resemblance?
I see the resemblance. Yeah.
So yeah, that's the cover. Yeah. So then I'll send you a copy and you can read it.
Only if it's autographed.
It will be, because I'm prepping.
My ebook was a little too short to be physically printed. It's that short. I think it's like 48 pages and the ebook's like 40 pages. My mother-in-law asked me for an autograph copy and I'm like, I can't do that. So now I have to have AI write the last 8 pages, give it the update on the TED Talk, and physically print one and send it to her.
Version 2.
Version 2, yeah. Think like an AI again? Think like an AI-er. More AIist. Yeah.
Chris, where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
deltadigitalagency.com is my business. I'm all over the internet. Chris Singel, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Don't find the Dutch man named Chris Singel that my father emails with. But real easy to reach. Happy to talk anytime with anyone. deltadigitalagency.com/press if anyone wants to have me on their podcast or hear more about my background. It's interesting. I've done a little bit of everything, but as you have, Tony, I appreciate you having me and love to hear more about your story and catch up. So hopefully we talk more soon.
We will. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and just such a rich conversation, and love getting to know you better. And it was an honor to share a TED Talk stage with you. And we both agreed we don't remember. We watched each other. And we gave each other kudos, but we don't know how we did in our own, judgment.
I know. You did great, but it's also like, was that as good as my rehearsal? I have no way of knowing until I see it live. Who knows?
No clue.
No
So
clue.
we're waiting, TED Talk people. We're waiting. If you're
we will send it out as soon as we get it, TED Talk fans.
All right. Until next time, if you guys want to find me, like Chris, I'm all over the internet too. kwings.com, mindfulnesselevated.com, tonywillcoaching.com. Where else? All those social platforms. So you can find me on all those. And until next time.